Welcome to the channel. Today is a true ghost story. During World War I, the German Navy built deadly submarines, U-boats. But one of them, UB-65, became a legend not because of its victories. From the very beginning, its construction was plagued by disasters and deaths. The sea always holds its mysteries. Thousands of ships lie on its seabed, but only a few of them inspire such a cold dread as the German submarine UB-65. Its story is not just a tale of war. It's a legend of a curse, of fear, and of a ghost that knew no rest. It all began in the distant year 1917, in the very heart of World War I. Germany was desperately searching for new ways to outwit its enemies. On land, their soldiers suffocated in poisonous gases, and in the sky, colossal airships bombed London. But beneath the waves, something far more dangerous was being born, a new weapon the world had yet to fear. In Hamburg harbor, at the Vulcan shipyard, engineers toiled day and night on a series of underwater monsters. Among them was the UB-65, the newest combat submarine, destined to become the pride of the Kaiser's fleet. But it seemed fate itself despised this vessel from its very first day. Scarcely had the builders begun laying the heavy steel keel when tragedy struck. A massive beam suddenly broke free from its fastenings and crashed down on two workers. One died instantly. The second was extracted from beneath the twisted metal for nearly 2 hours. His screams echoed throughout the workshop. From then on, the men began to whisper that the submarine had claimed its first soul. But death didn't stop there. When the diesel engines were installed, 3 engineers suffocated in the engine compartment, due to a gas leak. They were found lifeless, and the man who first opened the hatch swore that at that moment, the air in the compartment was black as coal. Despite all the misfortunes, work continued. War waited for no one. Every submarine counted, and even rumors of a curse couldn't deter German officers. Finally, in the summer of 1917, the UB-65 was launched. It was armed with 10 torpedoes and was meant to hunt along the British coasts. But even during its first trials, the vessel almost became a coffin for its crew. During a dive, one of the ballast compartments failed, and the submarine plummeted to the bottom. 12 hours, 12 agonizing, dreadful hours, the crew struggled to resurface. Panic reigned in the confined space. Sweat covered the damp walls, and the sailors' eyes resembled those of trapped animals. Miraculously, they managed to escape. Yet, it was only the beginning. During subsequent trials, tragedy struck again. A gas leak once again killed 2 people. "She takes those who touch her," the petty officer whispered, and no one dared to laugh. Sailors are a superstitious bunch. And rumors spread faster than radio commands. By the time the submarine was finally assigned to Lieutenant Martin Schell, most already considered her cursed. The young officer didn't believe in superstitions. He was disciplined, cold, and self-assured. He only believed in technology and the strength of the German spirit. But even he felt a strange unease when he first stepped aboard his new vessel. The air there was heavy, as if permeated with fear and something else, something unnatural. The day of the first sea trial arrived. The sailors were at their posts, and suddenly, a terrible explosion. A torpedo detonated right in the compartment where it was being loaded. 5 men were severely wounded, including the second officer, Lieutenant Richter. He was pulled out, burned and unconscious. 2 days later, he died in the hospital without regaining consciousness. From that point on, events began aboard that no one could explain. The first oddities occurred a few weeks later. One of the sailors, observing the horizon from the deck, suddenly screamed and collapsed. When Captain Schell rushed over, the man was muttering that he'd seen Richter standing on the bow of the ship. The sailor swore that he'd turned, looked him directly in the eyes, and then vanished as if melting into thin air. The captain was furious. He accused his subordinate of drunkenness, promised severe punishment, and ordered everyone to keep quiet. But rumors had already begun to creep through the boat. People whispered that Richter's spirit had returned, that he couldn't leave the vessel where he'd died. And as time went on, things only got scarier. A few days later, another sailor on night watch claimed someone had tapped him on the shoulder. When he turned around, the same officer stood before him, smiling a dead, cold smile. Terrified, the sailor tumbled down the ladder and broke his leg. 2 witnesses swore they'd seen Richter's figure in the hatch, before it dissolved into the darkness. Captain Schell tried to deny everything again. But deep down, he already knew, something was wrong aboard. The air grew thick, like fog. Engineers complained of someone's footsteps in the corridor where no one was. People awoke to the sound of breathing right by their ears. And more often, one word echoed in their conversations: curse. After the first reports of the ghost, the atmosphere aboard UB-65 changed beyond recognition. What was once iron discipline and confidence dissolved into a tangled mess of fear, tension, and distrust. Sailors spoke in whispers, avoided being alone, and glanced over their shoulders as if someone was watching their every move. Captain Schell did everything to maintain order. He increased patrols, forbade any talk of the supernatural, and threatened a court-martial for anyone spreading nonsense. But fear, like gas, seeps through even steel. Every day brought new strange occurrences. First, boot prints were found on the deck, wet, as if someone had just emerged from the sea. But the watch swore that no sailors had gone outside. Then, in the mess hall, someone discovered Richter's logbook, neatly placed on a table. The problem was that his personal belongings had been locked in a safe since the officer's death. One night, the duty officer in the engine room heard someone knocking behind the wall, even, slow, as if tapping out Morse code. He called his partner, and they both stood, listening to the sound. Then, silence again. When they checked the compartment, there was no one there. Only the smell of burning and a faint echo, as if the steel itself remembered someone's blows. Gradually, the boat came alive. Every rustle, every creak was perceived as a step. People stopped sleeping. Some crossed themselves, some whispered prayers, while others just sat, staring blankly until their eyes welled up with tears. And then new deaths began. During its second patrol, the submarine was off the coast of Scotland. One of the engine mechanics, working in a cramped compartment, suddenly screamed, and burst out, white as a sheet. "He's there. He was standing right behind me," he kept repeating. The sailors concluded the poor guy's nerves had given out. But a few hours later, he was found dead. Not a single scratch on him. His heart had simply stopped. Schell began to lose his composure. In his log, he wrote, "If I hadn't seen all this with my own eyes, I wouldn't believe it. The men are losing their minds. But I heard footsteps. And I saw a shadow in the hatch. It stood there, as if waiting for me. The captain no longer slept at night. He paced the boat, listening to every sound, every breath. Sometimes, he thought he heard a whisper, a low, hoarse voice calling his name. The vessel, once the pride of the fleet, had turned into an underwater nightmare. Soon, command received an alarming report, the crew demanded replacements, and the captain requested the vessel be blessed. This drew laughter from staff officers, but to appease the sailors, a Lutheran pastor arrived at the Wilhelmshaven base. He went inside the boat, recited a prayer, sprinkled holy water on the walls, and even stood by the torpedo compartment where Richter had died. After this, part of the crew was replaced. It seemed everything was getting back to normal. The next 2 sea patrols passed without incident. But the calm proved deceptive. July 10, 1918. UB-65 was returning from a patrol off the coast of Cornwall. A dense fog hung over the sea. Visibility was no more than 50 meters. The submarine surfaced to recharge its batteries and transmit a report. Suddenly, according to American sailors, a submarine appeared nearby, motionless. It was UB-65. The captain of the American submarine L-2, Lieutenant Augustine Grant, later described what he saw. It was as if it was frozen in time. The German boat was slowly listing to one side. A man stood on the deck. A single figure. Wearing a naval tunic, capless, he was staring into the distance. We thought it was an officer. But a second later, the ship shuddered from an internal explosion, and vanished beneath the waves. The Americans searched for survivors but found no one. The entire crew perished. In German archives, a record was later found, UB-65 unresponsive. Contact lost. Crew's fate unknown. That's where the submarine story could have ended, but it was just beginning. In 2004, almost 90 years after the tragedy, a British film crew discovered a steel silhouette at the bottom of the Atlantic, UB-65. Its hull was surprisingly intact. No torpedo marks, no signs of attack. Everything looked as if the submarine had simply frozen at depth and died on its own. The strangest thing was, the aft hatches were open. This meant that part of the crew had tried to get out. But no one escaped. Researcher, Dr. Innes McCarthy, after inspecting the wreckage, said, "It's as if the vessel didn't perish from an external impact, but from within. As if someone or something forced it to die." Since then, rumors circulate along the British coast. Fishermen claim that at night, they see the silhouette of a submarine in the fog, and on its deck stands a man in a long officer's coat. He stares out to sea as if waiting. Waiting for those who dare to approach too close. After the sinking of UB-65, the story of the cursed submarine swept through the entire German fleet. Officers tried not to discuss the incident officially, but rumors spread faster than radio signals. Sailors whispered that the ghost submarine still roamed the North Sea, that it could be seen in the fog, dark, silent, with a spectral captain on its deck. But the most disturbing thing was that UB-65 turned out to be not the only one. In the spring of 1918, just 2 months before UB-65's demise, another German vessel, U-85, encountered something that would later be called the strangest incident of the war. On April 30, in the cold waters off the coast of Belfast, the British corvette HMS Coreopsis spotted a German submarine, half-submerged, drifting towards the rocks. When the sailors approached, they were stunned. The crew stood on deck with their hands raised, pale, bewildered, and completely unarmed. Later, U-85's commander, Captain Lieutenant Gunther Kreck, was interrogated by the British. His words are still quoted by paranormal historians. "We surfaced to charge the batteries. The water was calm. And suddenly, something emerged from the depths. It burst from the sea and crashed onto the deck. A creature several meters long, with glistening skin and eyes that glowed like embers. It coiled around the gun and began pulling the ship down." Kreck claimed they opened fire with pistols and carbines. The monster roared, writhed, then crashed back into the water, but the submarine was already doomed. Water rushed in through the open hatches. The submarine began to sink. "We struggled," the captain said, "but it wouldn't respond. It was as if the steel itself had come alive and wanted to die." The British dismissed it. But the German fleet knew, such coincidences are never random. U-85 and UB-65 perished under strange circumstances. In both cases, no signs of an enemy attack. Both commanders, before their deaths, mentioned something otherworldly. And that wasn't all. 3 years earlier, in the summer of 1915, the commander of submarine U-28, Captain George von Forstner, sent a report to headquarters that was initially dismissed as a joke. He described how he had sunk the British steamer Iberian off the coast of Ireland. When the ship exploded, something enormous, scaly, with a long tail and a mouth full of teeth, shot out of the water along with the debris. The creature soared above the waves and vanished into the depths. "I would swear it was not a fish, a whale, or a seal," Forstner wrote. "It was a creature I had never seen before. We all saw it, 6 men on deck." Headquarters ordered silence. But among themselves, sailors began to speak of denizens of the abyss, of guardians of the depths, who sought revenge for disturbing the ocean's peace. It seemed that with every new submarine in the German fleet, something strange appeared. Mechanisms failed without reason. People heard footsteps in empty compartments, some swore they saw silhouettes in the portholes. 2 shadows were especially often mentioned, a tall officer's figure and a ghostly hand touching the metal walls. Many believed that the spirit of Lieutenant Richter, from UB-65, found no rest and roamed among the vessels, moving from one submarine to another, as if he belonged neither to the living nor the dead. Several strange reports from that time have been preserved in the fleet archives. One belonged to a submarine dock engineer in Kiel. "Every time we launch a new hull, rust marks appear on the rivets. As if the metal ages overnight. And at night, I hear footsteps in the dock. But it's empty." Another was from a priest who consecrated several submarines after the sinking of UB-65. On one of the vessels, right during the ceremony, the lights went out. "We heard a dull thud from inside the hull. The workers fled. Later we found them in the dock. They said they had seen the silhouette of a man in a submariner's uniform." By the summer of 1918, the Germans were almost certain, their submarine fleet was cursed. Too many disasters, too many coincidences. And yet, naval warfare demanded sacrifices. Command didn't believe in ghosts, attributing superstitious tales to fatigue and stress. No one wanted to admit that the ocean was alive. That it saw, remembered, and sought revenge. But the story didn't end even after the war. From the late 1920s, British and French fishermen began reporting strange phenomena off the coasts of Cornwall and Ireland, rising bubbles, a faint bluish glow underwater, and a sound, like a distant metallic groan. One captain claimed to have seen a ghost boat emerging from the fog, without lights, without sounds, and on its deck stood a human figure, entirely covered in a whitish shroud. When they approached closer, the boat simply vanished, leaving ripples on the water. Scientists explained everything as natural phenomena. But old sailors knew, it was UB-65, returned from the depths. Seafarers call such ships silent avengers. They know no time. They come to places where people have forgotten fear, and remind them that the sea does not forgive. They say if you find yourself in the fog off the coast of Cornwall during a calm, and hear a distant sound, neither a sigh nor a hum, beware of looking into the water for too long. Because, perhaps, right beneath you, UB-65 sleeps. And who knows, maybe Officer Richter still stands on its deck, in his dark coat, staring through the water's depths, into the faces of those who dared disturb his peace. Almost 90 years had passed since those events. The war had long since ended. The world had changed, technology had advanced significantly, but the sea, as always, held its secrets. In 2004, an expedition of British researchers, engaged in searching for sunken submarines, discovered a strange silhouette on the Atlantic seabed. It lay 20 miles south of the Irish coast. The murky depths, darkness, silence, and then suddenly, from the gloom, as if from a dream, the outlines of a submarine appeared. On the hull, the embossed numbers were still legible, UB-65. When the remote-controlled camera approached, everyone on board froze. The submarine stood intact, almost undamaged. As if time had simply passed it by. The torpedo tubes were sealed, the deck gun was whole. But the strangest thing was that the conning tower hatch lay open. Researchers speculated that the crew had attempted to abandon ship. But why? There were no signs of attack, no breaches, no fire. Everything looked as if the crew had simply vanished. Dr. Innes McCarthy, the expedition leader, later stated, "We found no remains, no signs of a struggle. Just a sense of presence. Down there, under the water, there was a feeling like someone was watching. It was literally oppressive." They recorded dozens of hours of video, but some of the files turned out to be corrupted. In some recordings, the image flickered, interference appeared, distorted silhouettes, and in one segment, barely noticeable, but precise, a human figure could be discerned, standing in the conning tower. The team decided it was a trick of the light. But the technicians were overcome with genuine fear. One of them, an experienced underwater drone operator, refused to deploy the apparatus again. He claimed to have heard a whisper in his headphones, indistinct but persistent, as if someone was trying to say his name. Several months later, these clips fell into the hands of documentary filmmakers. That's when work began on the film, The Cursed Submarine UB-65, Ghosts from the Deep. The film crew decided to retrace the original expedition's route and set off for the discovery site. At first, everything went smoothly. But by the third day, the team began noticing strange things. Equipment malfunctioned, compasses spun wildly even though there were no magnetic sources nearby. Footsteps were heard on the ship's deck at night. One of the sound engineers swore he saw a man standing by the railing, in an old officer's coat, with a cap in his hands. When he approached, the figure simply vanished. On the fourth day of their dive, they received a signal from the underwater drone. The apparatus approached the UB-65 and illuminated the conning tower with its spotlight. The camera slowly glided over the metal, covered in algae and salt. Inside, darkness, corridors, pipes, empty compartments. And suddenly, something flickered in the lens. For a few seconds, a human face appeared on the screen. Pale, blurry, with eyes wide open, as if the person hadn't had time to scream. Everyone on deck cried out. The camera immediately went dark, the signal cut out, and the drone never re-established contact. A week later, the vessel returned to port. The film's producer refused to continue shooting. 3 team members soon resigned, stating they wanted nothing to do with that submarine. One of them later told reporters, "Sometimes at night, I hear a hum, like someone walking on the deck. And a smell, that same salty, rusty smell. As if the sea has come for me." The film was never completed. But some of the filmed material partially leaked onto the internet. And in one of the frames, viewers noticed something no one had seen before. On the submarine's deck, in the spotlight's beam, stood the figure of an officer. It was impossible to make out the face, but a silver lieutenant's insignia was visible on the sleeve. He didn't move. He just stared, directly into the camera. Some researchers are convinced it's an optical illusion. But many, especially those interested in the mystical and maritime history, believe that the spirit of Lieutenant Richter truly remained on the UB-65. That he still stands on its deck, guarding his iron kingdom. The sea does not release those who disturbed its peace. And perhaps, underwater, there are no ghosts in our understanding. Perhaps it is the very memory of the ocean, forever imprinted with terror, pain, and death. Today, if you find yourself in the vicinity of where the UB-65 lies, and you drop a hydrophone into the water, you might hear faint sounds, a metallic clang, as if someone is moving through the compartments, or a distant tapping. Some swear that this tapping is Morse code. And if you decipher it, you can make out the words, Richter. And perhaps, at this very second, somewhere down below, on the deck of his lost submarine, he opens his eyes. And once again waits, for new guests.